So what's up, guys? Welcome back to the Better Not Bitter podcast. This is your host, Mayia, and I'm coming at you live with the Silent Migraine. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically a form of migraine where you do not have head pain, but you experience your usual symptoms of a typical migraine, or at least that is typical for you, in a way that those symptoms are that much more heightened. And for me, vestibular symptoms are more heightened today. Coming into the new year, I was wondering what I was going to do regarding this podcast. And I think I want to start implementing more audio episodes for you guys who have been rocking with me on Spotify. And I'm going to call this segment or these episodes just Better Not Bitter Tidbits. And today I'm going to be talking about what 2021 taught me in terms of my chronic illness, the things that it showed me related to those illnesses and my disabilities and things that I've been working on. So the first lesson and the main lesson is something I would like to call beauty, bravery, and burnout. And those 3 B's are important because in 2021, I saw the beauty in just navigating disability and chronic illness. And what I mean by that is I saw how my authenticity and my willingness to be vulnerable about how my symptoms affect me, my relationships, how it affects my mental health, what is advocacy like with chronic illness. I saw the beauty in sharing all of that and embracing that because I experienced so much community from that, even down to the people that I had on my podcast. A lot of those guests I was, blessed to connect with and still connect with on a regular basis. And for me, that means a lot, especially because when it comes to chronic illness and disability, one of the side effects can be isolation and loneliness. And with a pandemic, that is all the more heightened. But what I didn't realize was how much I needed a sense of community. And for me, that's what I gained in 2021. And that's one of the things that I saw the beauty in terms of lessons. Another aspect of beauty that I saw was just how even on my worst days, I may have felt lonely per se, but I knew that I was not alone. And that really came from community, but as well as my faith. I think having my faith, in Christ keeps me tethered in a way that maybe other people may not be aware of. This is due to a lot of what I went through in 2021, where I really began to see who God was, even through the lenses of my illness and disability, because a lot of the misconceptions that I learned through wrong theology, even in theologies like the prosperity gospel, name it and claim it, errant theologies about healing and deliverance and suffering, like a lot of those scales and a lot of those misconceptions were really things that people placed as additional quotas and procedures that aren't even biblically based in many ways, especially in terms of people with disabilities and chronic illnesses. And I saw that more clear than I ever have. I've always seen it, but last year was much clearer. And a result of that became a greater sense of who God really is. One of the things that I kept learning over and over again, like just because I'm not able to do the things on my to-do list, that doesn't make my ability to do what I'm called to do any less possible. And what I mean by that, even on the days when I couldn't get up out of my bed, I was able to lay in my bed and, encourage others or create content that would hopefully educate and create others. And that came from pain. Like I tell people all the time, like 98% of what you see, if not 100, is created in bed when I'm homebound, bedbound, and in some of the worst pain. And that is just by nature of me being an artist. My entire life, I have created from my experiences, whether they be positive or negative, for my betterment or to my detriment. Art, whether it be writing songs or painting or drawing, writing poetry or even prose, short stories, fiction, nonfiction. Writing in general or creating has been a source of release for me, even in pain. And for me, it makes it all the more manageable. And even in my journey in chronic illness, there are certain mediums of creation that I've kind of had to go to the side because of symptomology. And I've had to learn to grapple with that with other mediums of creation. So for me, I really saw how my faith kept me tethered through it all, because chronic illness is not for the faint of heart, and it takes a toll on your mental health. Even when you think you've made, quote unquote, a lot of progress, there are still days where you're reminded, oh, I still have a lot of work to do. And just my faith in understanding how God's word keeps me personally tethered in those moments was so essential that I really have no words to do it justice. So those are some examples of the beauty that I learned of about my chronic illnesses and disability. Moving on to the bravery. So bravery is an interesting concept, and I'm going to talk about it from a different standpoint. So bear with me. Normally, when we think of bravery, we think of showing up to the occasion, prepared with as much strength as possible, all the tools you need, with the morale, all of that. We think of being prepared and on guard and ready to approach or face whatever it is we're encountering. Well, with chronic illness and disability, something I've learned is bravery looks different in this context, because a lot of the times I feel on a day-to-day basis, I am living on an empty battery. I don't know how, but I am functioning and living on an empty battery. And for a while, as someone who has dealt with perfectionistic tendencies, that bothered me, because I felt showing up, being excellent, being brave meant I had to have more energy than this. So I would turn moments of radical rest into moments of pressure and even more added stress. But in 2021, I learned that bravery is simply showing up. And it's not necessarily without fear. Bravery is showing up with your fears, with your apprehensions, with your proclivities, with your habits, with your strengths and your weaknesses, and continuing to encounter those things that you must face. I've heard it said many times, as quotes on maybe Instagram or even like in passing, like, do it afraid, whatever it is, do it afraid. And there's some truth to that. But I interpret bravery in this context to be doing whatever it is with intentionality and your level of consistency and being committed to it, whatever that looks like for you, your chronic illness or disability. It doesn't mean that you got to have it all together. And that's even a fallacy in terms of society. Like when I started my YouTube journey, the reason I never started is because I felt I had to have the best camera, the best thumbnails, the best music, the best voice, the best microphone. And it's that mindset that can keep you from showing up, and it can keep you from starting in the first place. And one thing I've learned throughout my YouTube journey is sometimes it's more beneficial or impactful to just start. I think the rest comes, experience comes, confidence comes when we start, we show up, and we take it one video at a time, or one editing scene at a time, one audio clip at a time, just acknowledging the process, but showing up, bringing all of yourself that you possibly can to the moment in those times of creation. And a lot of times we're told we gotta have the best before we can even start. But if that was true, a lot of the world's inventions would not have been created. A lot of the world's most influential historical figures would have never been the most influential historical figures, because they would not have had it all together. Many of them started movements. Many of them created in places of trauma. One of the examples that I have been encouraged by is Faith Ringgold. She's a Black woman, an artist who really got her start on the edge of the Harlem Renaissance. If you don't know what that is, we'll be talking about Black history in February. But I was encouraged by her story because as a kid, she grew up with terrible, terrible asthma, which is a chronic illness in and of itself. And back then, they didn't have the medical advances, and especially being Black, you weren't exposed to the medical advances of that day as much as, other counterparts. So while she was indoors because of her asthma, that time that she had to spend indoors was used to create. She would draw, paint. Her mother taught her how to do clothing work like sewing and things of that nature. And she spent her childhood doing that. And lo and behold, years to come, it would be that she would become a professional artist, but not just a professional artist, but an artist who used that particular form of creation to create change in the women's movement and for African American men and women. So, the idea that we have to come with the best out of the gate is a bit daunting. I firmly believe that for me, having chronic illnesses and disabilities have caused me to be more creative and use what I have. I started my YouTube channel with just a cell phone. It had a poor camera. It was a decent camera, but poor in comparison to like a DSLR or something like that. But I used what I had, and I tried my best to be consistent. And through that process, I learned sometimes you just have to start, but all the time you should show up. And I think 2021 really showed me that just because I don't have the same amount of spoons as my neighbor, or just because I have to self-accommodate before doing certain activities of daily living, that doesn't diminish the ability for my actions to impact someone else, my artwork to impact someone else, my message to be any less effective. So yeah. Lastly is burnout. Burnout is pretty common among those of us who live with chronic illnesses and disabilities. It's actually a specific form of burnout related to those conditions. And often they coincide with maybe workplace burnout, relationship burnout, mental health burnout. So I find that this world of disability and chronic illness is often heavily intertwined. Everything seems to be connected. And for me, last year, I experienced burnout and pretty heavily. And this came on the heels of, not on the heels of, but And this came on the heels of a couple weeks. And this occurred several weeks prior to graduation, my senior year. And I'm just like going through the motions, physically, mentally, spiritually, every level. I was dealing with it, and I was exhausted. I didn't want to be in school anymore. It wasn't fun for me. It was kind of sucking the life out of me. And then you involve environmental factors and relational factors. So it was a whole smorgasbord of burnout contributions, if you will. And, in my quiet time, in times of prayer, I'm always intentional about asking what next moves are, looking at my goals and things. And I just really felt like when I graduated, I needed to take a month off of YouTube, off of creating, off of writing. I just needed a break, And so that happened. I made sure I had some pre-recorded videos, and then I uploaded them as premieres, and I was set for May. And through that time of like rest and hiatus, it was ironic to me because I'm going week after week, without being on social media and all that. And all I wanted to do was create. It was like by not creating or giving my creative brain a rest, it made the absence of doing that increase my desire to do the very thing I was taking a break from. And I would get ideas for writing, content, and I really saw how much creativity meant to me, but how much rest would become all the more important and an intentional part of my journey. So yeah, guys, that's just kind of a brief summary, the first episode of Better Not Bitter Tidbits. And I'll eventually figure out a better name, but thank you for listening, and I look forward to more dropping more episodes like this, migraine and all. You guys have an awesome day, and remember to live each day to become better and not bitter. And I will catch you next time.